Hello, here we are, another week. Hope everybody's doing okay, doing well. I'm just going to get a little situated here. Today we're going to be drawing some rock slides. I got a request on how to draw a movement. So I've never drawn a rock slide before. I don't have any photos of it, so I found a couple on the internet that I'm just using as a reference here. Oops, there's another one. Just to see how I capture that movement of the rock slide. So I'm just playing around, and kind of like I did a few weeks ago, as I figure it out, I'll put together a tutorial on it. But for right now, I'm just trying to sort of figure out how to go about it. So my expectations on, I have low expectations, but if it turns out well, then I'm a genius. Okay, so my approach is going to be kind of to treat it like clouds almost, because, showing that motion, it really looks more like a cloud forming rather than seeing individual rocks. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sort of rough in like a little cliff here. So if I have one cliff edge come down, and then we'll just sort of have the other cliff come down over here, something like that. And then our rock slide's going to come down in there, and I'll try to capture the motion. So the request came in for showing the movement, which is tough because not only obviously do I not have reference image, high quality reference image of a rock slide, but even finding one online of somebody who's captured the movement is tough. So I'm going to treat it sort of like a cloud and embellish the movement a little bit. So first thing here, I'm just putting in sort of like, if you've watched my how to draw clouds tutorials, I'm just putting in a little bit of a base layer so I can erase into it, and then see how it goes from there. So when I draw clouds, which the movement of this is sort of like the dust that's getting churned up from the rock slide. But again, it's going to look like a sort of like cloud dust. So what I like to do is put down like a base layer and erase into it. So I'm not putting much thought into it here. And again, this is all just figuring out, and if it turns out well, apply what I can to a more linear tutorial on how to draw rock slides. So now I'm just going to put in a little, make this cliff a little bit more believable. What is this? It's so somebody put in a request. Thanks for the question. Somebody asked if I could put together a tutorial on how to draw movement, and specifically a rock slide. So I'm just starting it out. I'm just playing around. I have never drawn a rock slide or a mud slide before, so I'm just trying to figure out sort of the ins and outs of it. So I'll add a little bit more detail really quickly. So this is my cliff here. This is one edge. Here's one edge of my cliff. Here's another, and then here's where my rocks are gonna, or the rock slide's gonna happen. And I'm looking up some images because I don't have any reference photos. I've never really witnessed a rock slide in person. It kind of looks more like clouds. So here's kind of what I'm basing. I've just found some images online. Here's what I'm basing my drawing off a little bit. And you can see, here's the rock slide. It looks more just like a puff of clouds. So I'm gonna try to embellish the movement, because again, this request came in to try to show the movement in it. And I'm taking the approach sort of, if anybody has watched my how to draw clouds tutorial, so that's kind of what I'm starting off as. And this I'm just roughly, sketching in some rocks here to give it a little more grab camera for a Lamar Jackson edit. Not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what that means. But anyways, let's keep going. So here's my, here's the little rocky cliff line, and then we're going to sort of ease them into this a little bit. Here's some more rocks over here. Just super rough, just sort of figuring out what my process could be. When you're sketching, you don't want to have too high of expectations. Turkish, that's cool. I'm here in Washington State in the US, obviously. West coast of United States. All right, so there's a very quick sketched in. You can see this cliff's a little bit closer. My rocks are a little bigger, and then here we're gonna go get smaller and smaller. Anyways, so I put down this base layer with just a chunky blending stump here. And we'll further define this as we go. But essentially here's where like my rocks are gonna be falling. So, you know, if I just sort of sketch in, here's where it gets a little tricky. In my reference images, none of these actually show. None of these actually, you can't see the rocks because they're too filled in. Like here's a good one. Looks like there's some snow in here as well. But all the dust and dirt that's kicked up hides the rocks. So we'll just sort of cheat some of those in here just for effect here, and then if it doesn't work, I'll adjust that when I put together a real tutorial here. Let me just zoom in a little bit here. Okay, that's good. So if we just have a bunch of rocks falling here, so they specifically in the request wanted to see the motion, which that is the part that, that's why I'm kind of wanted to sketch this out. I just figured I'd do it on a live because I thought some people might be interested, or at least see, you know, every drawing you start, unless you're just practicing the same things over and over, there's always sort of a learning curve to it. So just going in and playing around is always a good idea if you haven't drawn something before. Okay, so let's get in. So here's our rocks falling down. And again, if you've seen my cloud drawing tutorial, what I'm going to do now, so all this is like dust and rock and dirt that's kicked up. I'm just going to start trying to erase a little bit of texture and movement in here. See how that goes. I think I might need a little, let's get a little darker. Just get a little more variation in here. So from these rocks we'll have, my light's probably coming from this direction here, hypothetically. I just want to put some shadows. It's kind of like clouds, there's so much detail in there, and it's all super random. So again, one of my tricks to drawing sort of naturally and organically is I'm not thinking too hard about it. I'm just kind of letting it flow. Which again is, you know, when you're sketching, if you put all those expectations on you, you're gonna get frustrated a lot easier. So let's see, blend that out a little bit. So this is again sort of just similar to working how I'll draw clouds realistically, where I'm just sort of developing these different values and textures, and I like to erase it back in because you can sort of have things look more random and natural that way. This is just a sketchbook. The paper is kind of just like a medium to low level paper, so it's not the most high quality for blending and erasing. If you use, you know, more high quality paper, you can work it a lot more. We'll see how this goes. Okay, let's just start playing around and kind of erase streaks into this as if these rocks are falling down. Let me get a little highlight to my rocks here. So yeah, now it's kind of like I'm just using my erasers to sort of draw essentially. But since I have this base layer down, I can use it kind of like a pencil to erase these dust clouds back in. And you get a lot of these more sort of super subtle variations rather than trying to shade with like a blending stump. You can finesse as we go a little bit. I'm embellishing the motion a little. Again, my reference image just more looks like a big cloud more than anything. But if you've watched some of my other tutorials, I really like to lean on my erasers to give these natural textures and shapes, especially with clouds and like grass and stuff like that. And having, especially like this, again, I haven't ever attempted a rock slide like this, but having reference images are super important because, if you haven't witnessed or you don't see these things a lot, you have no idea how to go about it. I'm quickly realizing I should probably draw on or shade in some more textures on my cliff here, because the upper part of my sort of dust cloud is fading into my rock wall. But since the rock is falling from up here, I'm pushing my eraser up a lot more to give that motion. Even though, again, in my reference image, you don't really, let me show it one more time. You don't see it a lot, any sort of upward motion on it. So I'm sort of cheating that a little bit, but again, the request was to show movement. And if you know much about photography, to capture movement like in a photo, they normally have a longer exposure. And all the images I found online about rock slides, showing rock slides, they were all quick shutter speed, so it froze the moment rather than showed the movement of it. So I'm slightly embellishing that here. Just trying to get some nice layers, cloud-like layers, I would say. Yeah, let's put some, let's see here. Let's darken this cliff a little bit. That's maybe a little too dark. It's got a 2B pencil. I just want to shade this in relatively quickly because I don't want to focus on it, but this is important to having the top part of our sort of cloud of dust here reveal. So let's see how this goes. Just being super rough. Again, low expectations. Figuring things out. sort of looking more like a waterfall at this point, but we'll see if we can fix that as we go. And of course, I'm starting pretty rough, almost just to get a base layer of our rocks falling here, and then, you know, as I near the end of kind of what I'm attempting, I'll slowly hone in on all those details, obviously, but just want to get my rough sketch down here. And sketching like this, you can see I like to use the side of my pencil because I can fill this in super fast. If this was a more a drawing I was trying to do more with, obviously I would spend a lot more time on basically every single aspect of it, but just trying to sketch this all in quick so we can get back to that rock slide coming down. We'll just have come down here like this. This helps because it can then define the bottom more and hopefully get this cloud down here to shine where our rocks are falling. Give a little more definition. Looks a little muddy at this point, but as we get out here, we'll just give it sort of a little more of a hazy look. Get a little lighter. Okay, well that was a super quick cliff line. Let's do this front one too. I'm gonna get a little darker. It's closer to us, so we're gonna get more definition and all that. Darker values here. This is just a sort of a chunky 5B here. This will allow me to get more contrast here with our dust cloud to make it pop more. Just filling it in super quickly. These are just sort of pillars of rocks coming down. Okay, so that should be good enough for this. But now you can see with our two rocky cliffs coming down, can put more, I can make this dust cloud from our rock slide shine a bit more. And then with that contrast, here's some bigger boulders coming down. Now I'm just gonna hopefully just sort of finesse this cloud back in. You can see I'll probably need to add a little bit more graphite down here. I may have already taken off too much. On my reference image, you don't really get these movement lines. That's just sort of I'm just sort of embellishing it a little bit. Because again, that's what the original request was to show the movement, but in what I Googled, in my Google image search, I didn't really see much of that. I saw more sort of billowy clouds. So that's a bit more what I'm going after, but you can see all of my, or not all, but a lot of my movements are going up to where the fall is coming from, where the rocks are coming from. With this cloud of dust and debris here, similar to clouds, there's so much little nuances in the shading and values. That's why I wanted to get that base layer down. But yeah, I can tell the sketchbook paper, I normally work with a little bit higher quality paper. The sketchbook paper might not be ideal for this technique. Just doesn't quite give me as much flexibility with the erasing. But we'll see here. Maybe we'll do okay. I think this bottom part down here is kind of the most exciting. That's how I'm trying to get the most movement. Again, if I should show you this. See, there's not a lot of upward movement of the sort of dust cloud here. And again, there's a little bit of snow, but you can see where I really see the movement are in these sort of leading rocks and debris coming down. So that's what I'm trying to focus on the most here. Again, I'm just embellishing with the large rocks here, but just sort of playing around. It's getting a little muddy where my cloud of rock debris falls and the cliff starts. So I'm trying to define that a little bit more. You do see it in the reference image a little bit where they sort of blend together, but I feel like it's a little too blended together in mine, where it gets too muddy. That may have been because I started off with the cloud, and maybe I should have worked the cliff a little bit more, but that's why you practice and sketch it out. And I think I can tell already, adding some of these little rock details going up into it are good. Sir, can you help me to tell how to make highlights? So you mean highlights? I mean, highlights are all about, you need something to contrast your highlights, right? So like when I first started this drawing, I don't know if you were on or not, but this is a cloud of dust here coming up, right? And it wasn't popping off, it didn't pop in the drawing. So in order to make this highlight, you need to have darker values to contrast that. And then now, now I can see like, okay, this is now highlighted because it has that darker value to contrast. You need your brightest whites to contrast against some darker values essentially, and that will make highlights. Now, if you want highlights on this, if whatever your subject matter is, then you got to go about it and apply it to whatever your subject matter is. I just use this case right here because I obviously have this drawing up, but yeah, so if you're struggling with why something isn't popping off or looking like a highlight, it's because you probably need something darker butted up next to it to make it sort of pop. Hopefully that helped. So, and continuing on with that, like when I first started this cloud of dust, not that anything is super dark, but I needed some highlights within my cloud. So the first thing I did was just use a blending stump and, put down a base layer. See, there's no highlights in it. It's not super dark, but now there's a highlight in the center of it because it's against these darker values. The face isn't looking realistic. So I don't draw a lot of people. But yeah, with faces, I mean, in particular, the shading is essential, and getting your proportions down is super critical. So step one in drawing any face is you really got to lock in on your proportions, because if you start off with your proportions off, you're just going to be battling that the whole time. But I don't really draw too many people, so there are probably better sources than me for that. But yeah, I would just look on YouTube for that. But to me, when I do draw faces or when I draw animals, getting the proportion and scale down of everything is like essential, because if you start off out of whack, you're never gonna really get back. If you start applying your shadows and shading and your scale is off or your proportions are off, it's never gonna look right. But also, like depending on what you're struggling with the most on them, just try drawing, eyes and focusing on those, and then maybe move to mouth, or then do one at a time and then try to work them together instead of taking everything on at once. Sometimes breaking it down like that can help a lot. But yeah, mostly I draw a lot of animals, but mostly I draw landscapes. So there's going to be a better guidance on drawing people than me. But maybe one day I'll do that. But, I have more interest in nature than drawing humans. Yeah, so what am I drawing? And then they asked if it's a waterfall. So somebody wanted me to try to draw a rock slide and show the movement in that. So this is the main one I'm focusing on. So you can see there's rocks. These are just Google images I found. There's rocks falling off the cliff. And so it definitely does look a lot like a waterfall. But I'm trying, and this is my, I've never drawn a rock slide before. So I'm just sort of figuring out how to go about it. So when I put together a more succinct tutorial, I sort of figure out my steps. Because like I said, I don't really draw a lot of rock slides. So I'm just trying to see what the ins and outs here. But so I embellish these rocks down here a little bit just to give it a little bit of, I don't know, make it feel more like these are rocks coming down. I don't know if I necessarily feel that yet, but yeah, it definitely has a waterfall type of look to it. But again, so does that does a little bit. But in trying to show the movement, they're looking more like what I found online. They look more like billowy clouds rather than like what you might see in some sort of like animation or something where you have all these, movement lines going up. So what I thought was important to sort of for that movement to translate was have these sort of rocks that are leading the, at the beginning of that's the beginning of when the rocks fell. So they haven't reached the ground yet. And that's kind of the best way I thought about showing the movement. But yeah, it does look a lot like a waterfall so far. At least you're trying, and it's good. I love sketching and painting because I try. Yeah, you gotta try somewhere. Like I said at the beginning, my expectations for sort of nailing this drawing are pretty low. But, for your first attempt on anything, if you have high expectations, I think you're just sort of setting yourself up to be frustrated and potentially disappointed. But if you want to learn how to draw a waterfall, I do have a tutorial on that on my channel. And on that one, you'll see that one's more succinct than what I'm doing here. Here, like I mentioned, I'm really just sort of playing around. I want to give this a more billowy cloud look here. Think in art, there's no must, just what you think. Yeah, for sure. But everybody's going to be a little different, and that creates their style. And, for me, I like to see how other people go about things and apply what makes sense to my process. But, doing it your way is what makes that's what creates your individual style, So that's why I like tutorials. I always talk a lot about mine, right? I try to mention like, take what you can apply to your own practice and do that. And if you do it a different way, more power to you. But this is just sort of the way I go about it. These rocks down here I'm not super happy with, but glad I'm here. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, William. If you have any questions, throw them out. If you just got here, I'm just sort of sketching around, or sketching and trying to figure out if somebody wanted to see if I could help them draw a rock slide. Like I can draw a whale flying because I imagine. You know what? I'd like to see that drawing. It sounds pretty cool. I think you're getting some sense of movement in here. I feel like again, these rocks, I've got to sort of, my reference image doesn't have the rocks, but I gotta, if these are huge rocks leading this rock slide, this isn't gonna be, you're not gonna see probably this, whatever this would be, the sort of backside of these rocks. Maybe that's why it's not quite working. I wish I could show you. Yeah, I think there's a way to have multiple people in on these lives. I don't do them enough to know all the details and ins and outs of the lives yet. I kind of have it set up to just do as quickly and easily as possible. But I'd like to do them more often, and I put out a little question a couple weeks ago about doing a show and tell. So at some point, there seemed to be some interest. So at some point I want to do a show and tell on here. But also I'd like to open that up at some point where I could have people show their work. Sir, for beginners, what method is good, freehand or grid? For practice, freehand for sure. But I think you got to think about whatever the end goal is for your drawing. Like, so here, this is all freehand, right? And Simra, have you been on here? Is this your first live? Because I was going to show you some of my other lives when I use a grid, but if you're going to use a grid, you want to make sure it's because it's a drawing that you want to spend a long time on. Otherwise, there's not as much point to putting on the grid because the grid takes a lot of effort. So I only use the grid when I'm really trying. Basically, I only do grids when I want to hang it up on the wall. Because otherwise, like in this case, I'm just learning. And if I spent, a half hour drawing a grid on here, it would take me longer to draw the grid probably than do the sketch. And so there's not as much value, I don't think. And like you were asking about how to draw faces, if you're practicing and just learning and you draw out a grid for all those faces, you're going to be burnt out on drawing the grids over and over. But then, so practice without a grid, and then when you're ready to go for it, if you want it to be, an exact representation, then put the grid down. But I only use grids on sort of my most important drawings. Sir, I start with grids because it's hard to measure, like, from where to start. Yeah, like, Simran, are you talking about drawing faces still? Because I've seen some tutorials on that'll break it down. And there's one guy that talks about, like, the E method. And then, there's the old sort of measure with your pencil and thumb. Again, I'm not the best resource for that because I don't draw many faces. but YouTube's got to have a bunch of those up. But if you need a landscape, nature, animal guy, I can be a lot more helpful in those. But yeah, I don't use grids too much. So this cloud of dust is starting to come together a little bit. It's probably a little too defined here, especially looking on the camera. Looking on the camera, it seems like, when you get real direct lines like that, it just feels a little too sort of drawn on for me. Of acrylic colors. So you mean like, oh, you mean painting. So I first joined your channel and you gain a new subscriber. Thanks for subscribing. Yeah, I'm trying to grow the channel as in my spare time from my 9 to 5. Summer, it's been a lot harder in the summer here as the weather has been really nice. So I've been trying to go outside a little bit more. Yeah, I do a lot of painting. I actually, prior to the drawing tutorial sort of doing really well on here, I was doing more painting than drawing. But then the drawing tutorial sort of picked up. But like painting or like drawing, painting usually sort of based, has a foundation in drawing. So on my paintings, I would sketch out what I'm going to paint. So obviously there's a ton of overlap, but let me hold on 1 second here. Thank you. So, Simra, this is one where I am using a grid. And this is what I have been working on here on these lives for a while. So here's a case where I am using a grid because this is Mount Rainier in Washington State. It's a very well-known mountain. So the trees here, I'm not drawing exact here. That's more so I keep my scale in check for the mountain. But here's a case where I'm trying to draw as realistic as possible. This is graphite. So in particular, I'm trying to get it as realistic and to scale as possible. So I'm using a grid. And again, in the end, I'll probably frame this and have it hanging on the wall. So these, I'm just trying to show you a case of when I use a grid versus when I don't use a grid. And this I've spent hundreds of hours on, and in a no grid situation, I'm probably going to spend however long this live lasts. That's how long I'm going to spend on this one. And also the difference between that and this is the paper on that mountain drawing is way higher quality than the paper on this drawing. So that's the other big difference. Okay, let's see. It looks wonderful. I wish I could make it too. A lot of the techniques I use on that mountain drawing, I have tutorials on. So check those out. The forest, that forest is complicated. It looks complicated, and it does take a long time to draw. The forest on this looks complicated, and it takes a long time to draw, but the technique is actually not as hard as you would think. It's just you got to be patient. And for this forest, look at my tutorial how to draw a forest. And I'm actually doing one of these little blocks. And I have a few other ones. I work, if you look at my past lives as well, I do a lot of work on these. The mountains up here, this is a lot more tedious. I haven't done any tutorial on this up here. But yeah, these trees, I have multiple. If you're drawing a single tree, I have tutorials on that, or if you're drawing a forest like this, it's how to draw a forest. What paper do you use? So here's the paper when I'm doing like a more intense, high quality drawing. This is what I use. It's more expensive, and the sketchbook I have here, it's that same brand, I believe. It's just the paper, you know, this is a lot more cost efficient. If you want links to it, I'll put it down into the description after the video posts. I get it from Blix, which, well, if you're in Turkey, I think you said are you? No, maybe somebody else said they're Turkey. I'm not sure where you're located, but I don't know what they're shipping, if they ship worldwide. But yeah, check out. I have a playlist on my channel called Techniques to Draw Any Landscape, and I go over that forest quite a bit, especially on my lives. So check that out. But yeah, so there's a good distinction between when I use a grid and don't use a grid. Okay, let's see, where were we at here? So our rock slide here, I mean, I'm pretty happy with this, especially for first attempt. And, you know, I don't have complete focus on here. I want to make sure I'm answering questions and such, but for the most part, this isn't too shabby. But thanks for all the questions, Simra. Let me know if you have more. Let me know. Thanks, you too, for every answer. Yeah, no problem. That's why I like doing these lives. These lives are fun because I actually get I put together the tutorials, and it's kind of just whatever I think is important information, but the immediate feedback on these lives is really helpful because it also informs me more what to include in the tutorials. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun hanging out, seeing what people are up to. That's getting got a little too dark, but just trying to show some, again, and mimicking sort of my cloud drawing technique here, which is a lot tougher on this sketchbook paper. But I want to get sort of that super subtle variations in this dust cloud here. Drawing animals' eyes are quite hard. How you make it? You know, on any animal drawing or specific feature like that, I always start, if I have a photo or just on a Google image search, and get like some really good high quality reference images. Earlier you said, you know, you like to imagine it, but if you're going for that high level of detail, you need reference images. And every animal's, animal eyes are all different, they're not like perfect sort of ovals like this, a lot of times, like a deer eye, those are a lot more round. And if I, kind of going off memory here, I think they're a lot darker. But, starting with some high quality reference images is the way to go. And depending on how well you want to draw them, that's also going to depend on the scale of what you're drawing. I only have a couple animal drawing tutorials on a wolf and a deer, and they didn't do too well, so I didn't do too many more, but the scale on mine are They aren't very large drawings, so I don't get into the eyes too much. But with a specific feature like that, I would always start with trying to, Google image search, or, like I do a lot of photography, so I have a lot of high quality images, but getting some really high quality images where you get the detail, and depending on your scale, that's going to be your determining factor of how much detail you're going to put into it. Like you might sort of that under eyelid, and if you have hair down there, or eyelashes if you're drawing people, or whatever it is. Anyways, start with trying to find some high quality reference images, or of course you can start with trying to Google on YouTube how to draw a deer's eyes or something like that. There might be some. It's also, it's amazing what videos you can find on here. But yeah, I've only done a couple. I draw a lot of animals, but I've only done a couple of tutorials because, again, people seem to be more interested in how I draw the landscapes. Oops, not even on the video here. Hey, Ciora, how's it going? Cioria. Let me know, is that pronounced right? Cioria? Sorry if on my pronunciation there. Thanks for joining. Just sketching around, trying to draw a rock slide here, showing the movement. Which was an interesting request that I wanted to try. Just wanted to say, God bless you, brother. Have a great day. Hey, thanks, you too. Have a great day. Have a good weekend. Good Saturday. Looks good. Looks good so far. Looks so good. Thanks. That's better than again, and just sketching. If you just got in here, my expectations are low because I'm just sort of figuring out my sort of process on this. But we got a few new people. So here's the reference image that I've got off of Google. And you can see we got two sort of rock walls with this sort of avalanche-y and rocks coming down. Here's some more other ones. This is more direct on view, but they wanted to see the movement, and I didn't have any reference images, so I just started working off these and seeing what I could come up with, and then I'll figure out sort of a more direct path than what I'm doing right now and make a tutorial. Sir, it really needs a lot of patience. Yes. Yeah, patience, a lot of patience, and don't feel like you need to rush. I mean, unless it's like you got some deadline or something, but if you're going for, again, if going back to, you asked about grids earlier, if we're going to do something where you want to draw a grid and work on it that way, don't make yourself rush through it. Just take your time. Just sort of playing around with the clouds here. Do you have any course regarding art? Just curious. No, I do not have nothing that sort of formal, just my tutorials on my channel. That's all I got. things really go well on the channel, I can see that doing something like that in the future. It's just currently with my 9-to-5 job, I don't currently have the time to put something like that together. It's more at this point, I'm trying to keep up with the video requests or tutorial requests. So if you have any, Simra, if you have any requests for things you want to see drawn, you can comment on basically any tutorial on my page, comment what you want or looking for help with drawing wise. With exception, I don't draw a lot of people. There are better people to help you with that. But like, again, this one was somebody saying, hey, can you help me draw a rock slide? But no formal course of any kind. Still just not loving the bottom here, but that looks sort of okay, I think, so far for a first try. And like anything, drawing falling rocks is a hard thing to sort of translate on paper. Giving that context with a rocky cliff, or putting more details in my cliff here. And if I had, if I put in effort and drew clouds up here, giving everything context is going to make those harder things to sort of come to life. It's going to make that all more clear. Just when you're working on drawing, and it happens with water a lot. If you're working on a drawing and it's like, oh, this doesn't quite look right, try giving it context with some other features in your drawing. Sir, where are you from? So I live in Washington State on the west coast of the United States. But I'm originally from Minnesota in the United States. And that's where I went to school. In school, so my 9-to-5 job is working on TV shows. But in college, there was a lot of overlap with art classes and graphic design classes. And I've always loved drawing and later got into painting. So, now with YouTube being a big thing, it kind of all just came together like that. I'm from India. Yeah, I have a few. There was somebody on here, I forgot who it was. I think I have a bunch of people from India, which is really cool to think like people that far away are tuning in to watch me draw. It's just weird to think about. It's crazy, but cool. Hello. What time is it in India right now? Because here where I'm at, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. So I'm trying to get all these sort of like billowy clouds coming up here. Besides this, again, the sketchpad paper not being the best for this eraser, my scale is a little small here, so it's taking a bit of effort, but just sort of playing around with it, seeing what we can do. So I like these little these smaller erasers, you can sharpen and be more exact with them. But doing little taps like this, especially like think about clouds again. There's all these tiny variations in the sort of dust and smoke or the cloud if you're drawing actual clouds. And so just doing little taps, I can get a sense of all those tiny variations and give it that more natural and organic feel and look to it. 11:30 p.m. So it's like 12 and a half hour difference. Well, that's cool. That's hello to anybody else from India or wherever you're from. Somebody said they were from Turkey. I don't know if they're still on, but these lives are interesting. I was watching more of these lives because I didn't watch too many other people's lives, but now that I'm doing more, I watch some, and it's pretty interesting to see what people go live on. One person was just sleeping on the couch, and they had like 11 people watching them. Oh, it's turning into a waterfall. Hard work pays off. Yeah, well, it's supposed to be a rock slide, but they look pretty similar. Just trying to put in some more dramatic highlights here. This electric eraser, this can erase just about anything. My concern with this eraser on this paper is that it'll eventually maybe go through the paper, but it's just a sketch, so I don't really care. Can you draw Sungjin Woo from Solo Leveling? Can you draw? I'm not sure what that is. I'll have to Google what that is and get back to you. I'm not sure what that is. Sungjin Woo from Solo Leveling. Sir, it's actually in K-pop actor or idol, I guess. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it sounded, I figured it was some celebrity or something, but I don't know. I think I would need to prepare a lot more to draw that. Okay, well, it's looking okay. Probably make some adjustments when I put the tutorial together. Definitely got to work on sort of how I want this cloud to, or this dust cloud to look a lot more. But I feel like it's a pretty good first sketch for drawing something like this. And I'll probably, again, when I do the final tutorial, use paper that's going to allow me to get into that erasing a bit more. Because I can't quite get the sort of billowy effect that I want. how did you start drawing? Are you interested when were you interested when you were a child? I'd like to hear the story. Yeah, in elementary school, I was always big into art class, and my teacher, to stop us from drawing on our desks, would tape a big sheet of paper to our desk, so we could draw on that instead of on our desk, which was a good idea, except for then instead of listening, we would just be drawing. But obviously, growing up, I always wanted or had interest in art class. And then when I went to college, again, as I was getting my degree in television, there was, again, that overlap. And so I got back, took some art classes. I wasn't big into it for a while. But I had that overlap, so I learned the skills. And then after I'd been working for a long time, on TV shows, I wanted to start creating my own art and projects again. And then that's when it kind of came full force. I got big into photography and landscape photography, and I got into, wildlife and nature photography. And I did these paintings on these big animal heads that told the history of these animals. If you go way back on my channel, you see these time lapses of these big animal paintings I did. And that is what really sort of snowballed into sort of going all in on creating art again. But it's all on the side of my free time from my day job, which is the hardest part to juggle, especially with YouTube and trying to, create videos and then also work during the day, and then also, have some free time to do whatever I want. But yeah, I've always been really interested in art, but it didn't really come to like an everyday thing until I was like 30-ish. Sir, now don't forget me and my name. All right, yeah, I'll remember you. I hope to see you again if you're signing off. But thanks for joining. Simra Khan. I'll remember it. Okay, well, I feel like I'm just sort of doing the same things over and over, working this cloud, which I don't know how well this, again, this sketch paper is for this, but you can sort of, how is drawing a free-flowing waterfall different from drawing one frozen into ice? Sabrina, this is just sort of my first attempt at drawing a rock slide with movement, as you were hoping. So yeah, it definitely looks a lot like a waterfall, but it's actually kind of more off of this rock slide reference image that I found. Which this is sort of like an avalanche / rock slide. But it looks a lot like bubbly clouds. So it's definitely translating a lot as waterfallish, especially with kind of how I set up these rocky cliffs here. But it was sort of my first attempt to, and I've done this on other lives, where I'm trying to figure out a process to draw these, and obviously ideally, because you aren't the first person, how do I differentiate it from a waterfall? But it's supposed to be a rock slide. But so the billowy clouds here, I'm kind of trying my cloud drawing technique, but I don't know if the paper is quite allowing the flexibility for that. And I think, which often happens on these, is the attention to the drawing versus making sure I'm engaged with all of your questions, everybody's questions. It's kind of a juggling act. But this, yeah, so this is sort of attempt number 1. And I thought about practicing ahead of time, but then I also kind of like going on here and people seeing, like, learning how to draw. A lot of it is just playing around. And it's like, it's not like I get everything perfect on the first try. And also just sort of letting the pencil go, I think, is really important, and seeing what you learn along the way. Is that an eraser pen or a blending tool? So this is an eraser. I have been using a blending tool, but I use a lot of erasing. So this is also an eraser that I use quite often. And with the clouds and things, or like a puff of dust here, getting all these slight variations, I'm just kind of tapping with it. I normally have a little thing of sandpaper nearby where I can clean this off. This is just sort of how I get those little bubbly or billowy textures going. The part that I think I'm struggling with the most is this bottom part. This is how I was really trying to show the motion, because in Googling rock slides, most people take really quick snapshots, and this to me is the most definitive spot of the motion. Whereas you're not seeing like the rocks. Most of the rocks are covered up in these reference images, so you don't even see the rocks necessarily. You're just seeing the dust that they're kicking up. So I'm just trying to sort of figure out a good process and how to make these bottoms shine a little bit more. In regards to the first attempt as a writer, I concur. Your first draft is never your final project. Yeah, you gotta, I think you gotta put something down on paper, whether, I'm assuming writing is the same, just sort of as a foundation to build off of. Hi, how's it going? I think also the other thing here that I'm struggling with a little bit is the scale. Like if I had this bigger, I would have more space to maneuver a little bit, but at this point I feel like I'm kind of going in circles with building this texture here. But doing the final tutorial on that other paper, I think, is going to allow for a lot more. Just putting some sort of random highlights in, see how they feel. Not too shabby for a first try. Well, I think I'll apply what I've learned here. I'll probably do some more sketches on it to figure some things out. Definitely want to figure out, or at least have more of a game plan of how I want this dust to look, because I've kind of just been winging it as people ask questions. But unless anybody has any more questions, I'll probably sign off. But so yeah, there's normally my process for my tutorials, though. I just sort of practice here and then figure out the steps and then go back and put together a tutorial on it. Sir, just visit your Insta page. You like to draw wolf. Yeah, I did. I'm not sure which post you saw, but I did this painting of a wolf that took me 11 months to create. It's probably like the piece of art that most people have purchased prints of from me. But so if you look at that, if you're looking at the wolf painting, Simra, so it's a watercolor painting of a wolf, but then all the lines in there are actually words, and the words tell the history of wolves in North America. So I'm not sure what Insta post you're looking at, but you can check that out. Oh, and I've shown this before. Here, I'll show you here, Simra, if you're still on. So the wolf drawing is similar to this polar bear drawing, where it's a watercolor painting. But, you know, so it's a polar bear here, right? But then when you get in, these are all actually words telling the history of polar bears, the predictions for the future, climate change and its impact on polar bears, a map of where polar bears are in the world and the different ecoregions and such. So it's all about polar bears. And this, if you're looking at the wolf painting, that is the same technique as I did on this polar bear painting. If you're looking at that. So yeah, so those, obviously the wolf one has more color in it than a polar bear, but yeah, so that was one of the big projects. It took me, I did 6 of those. It took me 6 years. That was one of my first real big long-term projects. Okay, well, I think we'll call that a wrap. Give it just another second here. All right, well, I think that is going to do it for this week. Oh, I think that's a big misconception that non-creatives have about artists, writers, sculptors. The belief that you can sit down and do professional quality finished work in an afternoon. Yeah, for sure. Or that like I think for me, and doing these tutorials on video has taught me quite a lot, but like I don't really love the practicing part, but the tutorial, you know, most of the time the first several tries, maybe they're not failures, but they're working towards that 5th or 6th try, you know. It's not like it's rare just to be able to sit down and do it in one shot. And the tutorials, that's 100% true, because like besides figuring out the process, you know, just getting it where I'm happy with it, that to make it the most succinct. That's also why I'm not a huge fan of the tutorials, really, even though I do a lot of them. Because people, you know, take what you want to take from the tutorials, but do it the way that's best and easiest for you. And I hope people learn little tricks from me, but like the best way to do it is whatever is easiest for you and your sort of, I don't know, talent or skill. Oh, really, sir? I saw that wolf, and it's really made of words. Yeah, it's all those. So that wolf painting, it took me 11 months to create, and the first like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months was all research, learning about the history and sort of in the U.S. here they tried to eradicate wolves, and then they brought them back, and it's a fight that still continues. I used to have a Simra, if you look on my YouTube page, it's probably like my first video posted. It's of a grizzly bear. Check out that time lapse if you got time. It's only like 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. But that's the same technique. I'm really just doodling at this point. All right, everybody. Hopefully you learned something. And if not, then this was all a big waste of time. All right. See you next time, everybody.